Winter, 1881, Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. Snow lies in sifted seams along the ribs of the Alleghanies. Smoke hangs low over the bituminous towns, and a coal foreman's cabin crouches by a stand of second-growth oak, its plank floor lifted on stones over a crawl space that exhales cold. In the county registry, there is a blank where a parcel note should be. In the physician's docket, a page has been knifed out at the spine. In a church Bible, calf skin scuffed smooth by a century of hands, one leaf holds a single line, unsigned in a tight, careful script. Maggie still hums beneath the earth. 7 years old. Her name is Maggie Thompson. She wakes nights gasping for air, eyes wide, fingers clawed at nothing, her voice a whisper nail on the dark. Men with lamps under the floor. She points toward the hearth, toward the cold-lit seam where the boards do not quite meet the stone. On good nights, she settles quickly. On bad ones, her breath hitches and whines until dawn. Within weeks, the ground itself seems to answer. Small cave-ins begin appearing near their cabin, like mouths opening in their own time, sudden and neat, revealing crude tunnels that dogleg in the dark and then stop. No timbers, no proper cribbing, just hand cuts and old breath. They lead nowhere. The father, John Thompson, a foreman at one of the pits pushing north into the county, brings a lamp and a man. He knows a company shaft when he sees one. He knows private stabs at coal, too, the wildcat scrabbles men will make to shave a winter. These tunnels are neither. Their walls hold scratch marks like a child's maim practiced wrong. Their ceilings sweat. Into this enters a doctor, Elias Brenner, M.D., a quiet man with a German father, and a reputation for keeping his head when miners come up white-faced or suddenly still. He records what he can, as carefully as he can, because something in him refuses to let the odd go unpinned. In his medical ledger, in a hand neat enough to belong to a clerk, he writes a line that suggests fascination and dread in equal measure. A living echo of the mines. He means Maggie. He writes that after each episode, after each midnight gasp, each whisper about the men whose lamps burn under the house, Maggie's skin emits a faint phosphorus glow. Not a blazing ghost light, not a showman's trick, a breath of light, a greenish wash at the collarbones, the wrists, the fine bones at the point of the shoulder. It fades. He waits and watches, and in the spent dark of February, it returns. He asks the Pennsylvania Medical Society for time to present his findings. He is told curtly that sensationalism is unbecoming of a physician. Someone uses the word expulsion. He is a local doctor, and local doctors are meant to keep the county's body working, not frighten it with talk of luminous children and tunnels to nowhere. Then spring puts its thumb on the hills, and the snow recedes. The Thompsons disappear as if lifted by a tide no one else can see. The cabin stands sealed from the inside, bolts set, shutters nailed, and across the whitewash of the hearth, someone has scrawled in chalk in a child's urgent print or an adult's hurry disguised as it. She showed them light. County authorities order the cabin burned. It goes fast. The smell is wood and good resin, and something that clings. Township files, what few there are quietly scrubbed. If you request them decades later, you will be told with bureaucratic calm that no such incident is on record. Except that single unsigned note preserved in a church Bible. Maggie still hums beneath the earth. What's known is a handful of ugly, bright facts. What's sealed, lost, or disputed is thick as the coal seam itself. We have a doctor's phrase, a chalk scrawl, a string of subsidence holes that local men still skirt in later years. We have an entire family, father, mother, child, who leave no forwarding address. We have neighbors who, in old age, swear they once saw a girl whose skin in the night made a dim light like foxfire on rotten logs. And we have a child who said there were men with lamps under the floor. But why did this happen? And why was it erased from history? If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And tell us what city or state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. Backstory. Clearfield County in 1881 is a county in the grip. The grip belongs to coal. Bituminous, softer than the anthracite farther east, but just as hungry. Timber stands fall in lines to feed the mines and the railroads that carry coal cars like dark beads out to the steel stomachs in Pittsburgh and farther. Towns have grown from camps, Hotesdale, Osceola Mills, Madera, houses thrown up fast along creeks and tracks, company stores with ledgers that remember every pound of flour and every spool of thread. Men go down at dawn and come up at black dusk with coal ground into the cuticles and the creases of their hands, in the hair, in the lungs. They cough, their wives shake sheets, and black dust falls like extra night. Illumination underground is simple and lethal. Open flame. You tie a tallow or oil lamp to your cap and hope the air is clean. Fire damp, methane, collects in old pockets and waits like a snake. Afterdamp steals what oxygen is left after an explosion and leaves men walking without a heartbeat for a minute or two before they understand it is over. The last decade had been filled with trials and hangings in the anthracite region to the east, the Molly McGearys, Irish miners accused of murders and sabotage, crushed in public to send a message. Men in Clearfield know the message. They carry it in their bones. Speak softly. Organize carefully. Don't put your name where a manager can point at it. Superstition here is not childish. It is calculus. You listen for knocks. You listen for the earth talking, the low moan that rides the timbers before they go. Some miners, Cornish and Welsh especially, carry stories with them from the western toe of England, the knockers, the Tommy knockers, spirits that warn of cave-ins by tapping, or lead men to rich seams if they are treated with respect. The stories change with each retelling, but the habit remains. Hear everything. Nothing is just noise. John Thompson is not a faceless miner. He is a foreman, one of the men the company trusts to keep a seam moving and the men under it disciplined. He is 35 or 40, records differ, lean and a lantern way, a man who has learned to ration words in the dark. His wife, Mary, keeps the cabin tight, keeps the ledger, keeps Maggie dressed in assignments to school and put to bed at reasonable hours. The cabin itself is nothing special. Clapboard, a slate of a roof if they are lucky, single room with a loft, plank floor hovering above a crawl space large enough for a dog, the hearth large enough to cook a stew and warm boots by. Dr. Elias Brenner is the son of a mason who came here from Hesse with a trade and a few German books he read himself to sleep with and burned for kindling in his first winter when the woodpile ran low. Elias grew up between two languages and then learned Latin for medicine and a third one for respectability. He apprenticed under a Clearfield physician and went to Philadelphia for a season to sit for his examinations, gathered a handful of committee memberships, and came back because there is always work in a county where men go into the earth daily. His ledger is tidy. He speaks quietly when men are hurt because their friends are listening for hope. When kids get the croup, he sits for hours by kitchen hearths, dosing laudanum in black teeth spoons and tapping tiny backs. He does not like to be told what he has seen he did not see. Every town has its archives, big or small. In Clearfield, it's a stack of bound minutes in the township office, some land deeds, a few marriage licenses, a scattering of coroner's inquests. The Methodist and Presbyterian churches keep better records than the county. They write births and deaths in family Bibles in tight loops that survive floods, fires, and carelessness better than any government archive. That, in the end, is why a single unsigned note survives where others do not. It lived in a Bible, pressed against the cover by a family that refused to part with its book when the county men told them to give the whole matter back to the fire. Add to this culture the era's other craze, the medical hunger to classify. Phosphorescence is a word doctors have lately begun to salt their speech with. They know it as the property of substances that glow in the dark after exposure to light, phosphorized compounds, some kinds of wood riddled with luminous fungi known to country people as foxfire, oily films on dead fish, jars whose insides wash with pale light after you stop the upturned wick. They don't have radium, they have matches, white phosphorus, the kind that will in a few years make industrial matchworkers' jaws rot from within. The late Victorians are beginning to flirt with spiritualism, with table tipping and slate writing. But in Clearfield, men and women have little time for parlors. Their ghost stories are functional. If it knocks, you step back from that tunnel and live. Into this mixture, coal and caution, hunger and hush, walk the Thompsons and their daughter. Maggie is 7. She is ordinary in the way children who become unordinary always are before it begins. She twists her wool gloves into snake shapes when she is told to sit still. She counts with pebbles. She hums when she is nervous. Her voice is thin at first, and then when the house is quiet and the stove settles, it swells like a bottle rolled in a river current. In January of 1881, the men at John's seam pull back from a sudden bleed of water at the face. No deaths, no wound, just one lesson tapped into bone. There is a creek above us somewhere we haven't accounted for. The company geologist, who has book learning and a new hat, mentions erosional old works, gravity, the way long mines boast under the surface and take surprises with them. John nods and says little. He goes home with the shift change like always. That night, his daughter wakes clawing at the air and says there are men with lamps under the floor. The first night passes like a bad dream rattled off at breakfast. Maggie's cheeks go chalk. Her mother pats water against her forehead and scolds the stove for cooling too fast. John lifts a board near the hearth, just to show. The crawl space is a shallow black, grit, a lost clothespin. He sets the board back and keeps his face easy. He says there are no men under this floor. And for an hour, Maggie believes him. The second night it happens again.
It is colder. The boards have shrunk a hair from themselves. The wind finds the seams and plays them like a panpipe. Maggie sits up. She heaves and then breathes, heaves and then breathes, and her eyes fix on the hearth. They're down there. They're lamps. The little glass. She cups her hands as if around a miner's lamp, as if she knows the feel of it in her palms, though she has never been to the mouth of a shaft. On the third night, Mary lights a candle and holds it low to the floorboards when the gasping begins. The flame bends toward the gap as if a draft is drawing it. She says, "There's air." John frowns. He knows air. He has told men to walk away from a face because the air feels wrong, because your tongue tastes copper, because your skin twitches as if warning you toward the ladder. He kneels and slides a knife blade into the seam and feels the answer in his bones. Moving air. The ground outside is hard. A thaw is coming, but it is not here yet. The first cave-in appears next to the stump of a tree that had been cut down years ago when the company first cleared for a path. It is neat, a circle, 3 feet across, straight edges as if a pastry cutter had been pushed through the world. It reveals a column of loam and then an abrupt opening into dark. Men bring a rope and a lamp and lower a boy who is small and too brave. He drops 6 feet, 10, then stops. "It goes," he calls. "It goes a little long." He laughs because he has not yet learned not to laugh when he is afraid. They bring him up. John lowers himself next with the lamp. The shaft goes sideways almost immediately, deep enough that he has to crawl on elbows. The walls are not coal. This is not a seam. It is clay with stones set in it like buttons on a worn coat. The marks in it are odd.
Not tool marks as he knows them. Not proper pick lines, but hashings like the bored doodles of a child who has stolen a bit of slate. It leads nowhere. It turns again, and ends. John backs out, cheeks streaked with pale mud. The men want to call it a gopher post, a sink where water has made a fool out of a tree's old root system. They agree to call it that. Men survive by agreeing what they see. But in the yard, Mary squeezes her hands into her apron and says to no one, "They were there before we put our house down." Dr. Brenner comes the night after the first hole opens. He is summoned because Maggie has begun to do a new thing. After her gasps pass, and after she murmurs about the lamps, her skin, only then, begins to glow. It is so faint they almost do not see it. Mary keeps the lamp low, and then lower, and then puts her hand over the flame and leaves the room just dark enough that their eyes can weigh what light remains. Maggie's collarbone reflects a breath of green. Her wrist shows a line like a bracelet made of firefly glass. Brenner brings a folded cloth and asks to cover Maggie's arm, then uncovers it again. In the instant when light goes from cloth to skin, the skin seems to answer. He notes it. He watches her breathing settle. He asks questions gently. What did you see? Where were the men? What did the lamps look like? While John watches him with the small frown of a man who is used to being listened to at work and not watched for softness at home. In his ledger that night, Brenner writes, "Child, female, 7 years, of good parentage, struck by an unusual affection of the nerves at night, in which she gasps for air and speaks of men beneath the house. Immediately afterward, a phosphoric light is discernible on the epidermis, the clavicles, the wrists, the dorsum of the hand. The luminescence is faint, greenish. It fades by degrees. Then a line below, as if he can't help himself. She hums. The tone corresponds to the pitch one hears in mine shafts when the timbers vibrate.
By the fourth night, more neighbors know, attention has a sound, and even those trying to keep their tongues tight cannot entirely stop the whisper. A man down the road says his father saw foxfire on Old Oak in Maryland, and that this is the same. Another says foxfire doesn't put itself on children. A third, who remembers Cornwall not by living there, but by hearing about it his whole raising, says, "The knockers show themselves with light sometimes." He is not taken seriously by the foreman class, but the men who do the cutting do not laugh. The second cave-in opens a week later, closer to the cabin. It spills a scent like a cellar, like winter potatoes. The tunnel below is shallower, the scratch marks less energetic. The men who look fast. A boy says, later to his wife, that it felt like the tunnel was listening while he was in it. Brenner keeps visiting. He experiments in ways that would be chided in a city, but are the only ways available here. He robs jack-o'-lantern fungus on a board and lets it sit in a shed to learn how long it shines. He strikes matches near the seam of the floor to watch how the flame leans toward the gap. He pours water in a cup and watches how dust from the crawl space moves when he sets it there. He is a little bit scientist, a little bit animal with his ear to the earth. He also writes to the Pennsylvania Medical Society. He uses careful language. He avoids the word haunting. He uses phosphorescence, luminance, respiration. He says nothing about knockers. He receives a reply suggesting that he perhaps enjoy the next meeting as an observer only. In private later, someone tells him to cease making the county a byword. He notes it, closes his book, and decides to present anyway, then decides not to. Other patients are bleeding while he tries to teach men who do not want to learn. The third cave-in is not round. It runs like a slit along the length of the Thompson yard, 2 feet wide, 8 feet long. When it opens, the earth exhales. If you had been standing there, you would have felt a draft against your boots as if the hill had sighed. A neighbor says she could hear something in that breath, like taut string plucked, like a mouth around no words. Maggie sleeps through the day like she has been running in her dreams. That night her skin lights as if the glow has learned its choreography now and knows where to go. It is around then that the pastor, Reverend Hale of the Methodist, a man with a kind face and a poor poker face, comes to sit at the table and drink coffee that tastes like the bottom of a barrel and say in a roundabout way that superstition is catching. Mary tries to say none of this is their idea. He says, of course, and asks quietly if he can pray with the child. He prays. He does not look at her skin when it glows. He looks at the wall above her head and prays at it, which is exactly the right thing for a man in his position to do. Afterward, in his pocket ledger, he writes, "God help them." He does not let the countymen see the entry. Somewhere in town, this detail is as slippery as an eel, but it surfaces in more than one story. John is told by a supervisor that the men do not like to hear about his child. It makes them jumpy, and jumpy men are slow men, and slow men are money lost. The supervisor says this like a friend. He offers John extra shifts away from the cabin. He suggests moving to Mary's sister's household in Tyrone, just until it all dies down. He says the company likes him and does not want to see him in a hard spot. By March, the thaw truly bites. The creek bed nearby swells. The ground slumps in places like a tired animal laying down. The fourth and fifth collapses open between the Thompson yard and the trees like a path, though a path to what, nobody knows. Men who peer into these holes come back with dust in their hair and not much to report. The tunnels go a little way and then stop. Always stop. Each displays the same wrist-high scrawl marks. Once, John brings up a noise, half a laugh, and says, "She says they are showing the way." Mary looks at him as if he had cracked, and then refuses to permit despair in her house. Maggie begins to hum more. It is less attuned than a drone, a vowel under her breath that sits in the chest. If you stand by a mine mouth when the wind crosses it, the air speaks like this. If you cup your ear to a railroad rail when a train is coming from miles away, you can hear this frequency. It is a note that says something moves. Brenner, not yet brave enough to perform his experiments in front of other men who will mock him, tries one more time to formalize his observations. He writes, "After each episode, the child's perspiration appears to hold an oily quality. Is it possible that exposure to match heads, phosphor, or to some effluvium from the mine renders the skin faintly luminous under certain conditions?" He has read of glowing wounds among soldiers in old papers,
chalks it up to infection and luminous bacteria, then laughs at himself for inventing names to cover ignorance. He knows enough to be humble. He also sketches a small diagram of the house, the hearth, the board's seams, the positions of the 4 sinkholes. He swallows and writes "small" at the bottom. "She asked me where the ladder to the men was, and whither I carried a lamp." The final week feels like a storm people only recognize as a storm once it has passed. The county squire, appointed to keep order more than justice, comes out with a deputy and makes a show of measuring the holes and spacing and writing numbers he will burn later. He says the land is unsafe. He says other families are to be protected. He orders the Thompsons to vacate until the ground holds. John balks at being told what to do with his own door. He has spent a life executing orders well enough to keep a wage. He has not spent a life having his home declared enemy. He says they will sleep with friends if that calms the town. Mary sets bread to bake and ties her shawl in double knots because she can feel life wanting to shake itself apart. And then there is chalk. Where they found it is anyone's guess. School children carry stray pieces like eggs in their pockets when the weather warms. But someone finds enough to press the words that will be the last the county admits were written at the Thompson place. We do not know who wrote them. Later gossips decide it must have been Mary, or John in a fit, or a neighbor boy who thought himself brave and became a monster. But there it is, in letters large enough to fill the hearth's face. She showed them light. The cabin is sealed from within. No one sees them leave. The bolt is set, the shutters nailed. A day goes by, then a second. The bread in the kitchen is burned. A man, not one of their friends, takes it upon himself to break a window to see if they are ill, dead, or died. He comes back gray. They are not there. It's as if they walked into the wall. The county orders the cabin burned. The men who do it do not include John's friends. Those friends stand at the edge of the yard and watch and swallow hard and do not speak, because speaking in Clearfield has a price. The fire is fast, clean, perhaps cleaner than it should be. In the ash, nothing is found that answers any question. The chalk words, bright against brick as the hearth cracks, survive longer than the door. She showed them light. Then they go to powder. Who investigated? Not in the modern sense. There is no task force. There is Brenner and his ledger and his patience. And there is the supervisor who whispers warnings. And there is the squire who thinks first of order and last of truth. There are miners who remember knocks, and children who stand in doorways and do not want to be sent to bed. There is a pastor who, scandalized by nothing but frightened by everything, prays louder than he thinks. After the burn, there is silence. Theories leak into that silence with the stubbornness of water. Each offers a way of looking. None settles the dust. Environmental poisoning and suffocation. The simplest explanation for Maggie's night episodes is physiological. Coal country is a theater of invisible gases, methane, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and their blend with air is the line between breath and no breath. A crawl space that drew draft through old, shallow drifts could have wicked up a gas cocktail that tipped, at night, into a mix that made a child's lungs spasm and her brain spark visions, men with lamps under the floor. Carbon monoxide poisoning is notorious for making comforters into weights and bodies into boats, for sending bright pictures into the skull like gifts that turn out to be knives. It can make skin flushed, but glowing? No. Phosphorescence. But of what? Brenner's observation, a faint phosphorus glow, does not require supernaturalism. White phosphorus for match heads, used everywhere in 1881, can smear and later glow in a dim room as it oxidizes in thin films. A child handling fallen match ends, then sweating after an episode, could have appeared faintly luminous to eyes already startled. Luminous fungi, foxfire, are known in Pennsylvania woods, and there are cave lichens and mosses, like Schistega pennata, called goblin gold, that gather light in the green gloom and send it back like trapped coins. But on skin? The leap from fungus on wood to child's glow is too long for science to clear without falling. And yet Brenner, who knew wood and boy tricks, was not an easy mark. His choice of the word phosphorus suggests he at least thought chemistry, not spirits. The knockers, folklore with teeth. In the bituminous and anthracite regions alike, miners told stories of Tommyknockers, Cornish sprites, half helpful, half malicious, who knocked to warn of danger or to lure the unwary. In Pennsylvania, they became cautionary jokes and private saints. Men with lamps under the floor is a phrase that feels like a child's angle on a belief already in the air. If you grow up hearing about men who were and are and will be under your feet, if you fall asleep to their boots in the talk, if you are told to listen for knocks as a way to keep your father alive, your dreams will assemble those pieces into a picture. Folklore often arranges reality more efficiently than fact. In this telling, Mary is not a conduit for anything supernatural. She is the house's mind made audible, the sum of knocks and drafts, giving itself a small person's voice. Fraud and leverage. The ugliest suggestion is also among the most plausible. A foreman near a trouble-prone seam, water bleeding, air drafts wrong, tells a story that makes the company's liabilities enormous and immediate. Unauthorized shallow workings under domestic land, risk to families, negligence in mapping old entries. If the tunnels were there, and if the company maps failed to show them, the story could shutter a pit. Stir a little superstition into the brew, and production drops. Under this theory, the cave-ins were staged. Shallow trenches, a child's talk fed by parents' whispers, a chalk message loud enough to be remembered and crass enough to force action. The family's disappearance becomes a flight from consequences. But staged by whom? And to what end? John, a foreman who knows every man who could catch him? The neighbors, who would be first to suffer if the company turned away? And what of Brenner's reputation? He risked his standing. For what? To boost a hoax? The fraud hypothesis explains the company's fury, but not the doctor's notes, nor the pattern of the holes, nor the odd scratches inside. Company malfeasance and scrubbed liabilities. Another conspiracy, closer to business as usual. Old exploratory drifts driven aggressively and forgotten lay under the Thompson place. The company knew, or should have known, and feared what the discovery would cost. The fastest way to ensure a problem burns away is to burn it away. The family relocated quietly under threat. House destroyed. Records deleted. The chalk line, "She showed them light," reads here as accusation. She drew attention to where we buried our mistakes. That this kind of suppression happened is no myth. That it happened here is what we cannot prove because the proof was reduced to ash on order. A medical curiosity. Night terrors are real, brutal, and common in children. So is sleep apnea, especially in winter houses where stove smoke loads the air and everyone sleeps on ticking stuffed with dust. The glow might be sweat on a child's warm skin, catching whatever light remains like a lens. The men under the floor, a vision born of half-sleep and the clanging, specific vocabulary of a coal county.
After the cabin was burned, the story did not go out. It went down. It went into low talk and the stubborn ink of personal ledgers and the margins of church books. It went into the places the company clerks couldn't reach, the places county men didn't think to search, because no one ever does. Legal holdings are for property. Memory is for people. The Thompson name dissolves. It pulls one last shadow in a company payroll list in the spring. Wages for J. Thompson, paid through March, then a blank. A woman in a neighboring town, Tyrone most say, takes in a Mary of the correct age in the summer for a month, and then the woman dies or moves, and the lodger is struck from the apron of record. Brenner treats a girl in April with a cough that catches, writes M-T in his book, and then strikes the line once, a doctor's way of telling himself that his head is making cousins where none are. Men in later years avoid the ground where the cabin stood. Miners are not sentimental about the soil, but they are careful. Even when the company cuts timber roads through that ward, men call the stretch near the stand of oak the breath, because the air always seems to move there when no wind is. A boy on a dare pries up a plank from a house set on the same footprint 20 years later and insists that he hears humming, not in the air, but in the wood itself. He grows up and drinks, which proves nothing except that men in Clearfield carry weights in their chests. Brenner's career stutters and then resumes because the county cannot afford to discard a competent physician. He does not present at the Pennsylvania Medical Society. He takes to writing more than he keeps. Late in his ledger, a different hand, his wife's likely, writes E. set to bed for illness, and then writes it again a week later. He dies of a chest complaint, like most men here. In the trunk beneath his bed, folded into the sleeve of an almanac, is a loose page describing Maggie's episodes. It survives a small house fire because his son, a clever boy, throws the trunk out the window before the flames take the floor. Years later, during an estate sale, a picker buys the almanac for the pretty marbled paper, finds the page, and doesn't know what it is. He uses it to wrap a set of buttons and sells it to a woman who will tuck the buttons and the page into the family Bible,
because nothing ever really leaves a Bible once it is put there, and that is why one line survives when the rest are ash. Maggie still hums beneath the earth, unsigned. Maybe it was Brenner's attempt at a private epitaph. Maybe Mary wrote it to convince herself that her child hadn't vanished, but had become something the county could never burn. Maybe it's an old woman's flourish, in 1910, remembering a winter's story when the lamp made the drifts shine blue and the dog refused to come in out of the cold. The words, "she showed them light," become their own little theology. Some say Maggie showed the men under the floor where to go, the way up or the way out. Some say she showed the county where the company had buried its negligence. Some say the men with the authority to order a cabin burned saw the light she showed and decided to make sure no one else did. The phrase is a mirror. You see in it whatever you carry to it. In the folklore of miners, sound is the thing that saves you. If you ignore the timbers talking, you die. If you heed the tommyknockers, you live. If you hum the pitch of the air, you are less alone. There are long drifts under Clearfield and Cambria and Indiana counties where men swear, softly in the shaft while their lamps scratch shadows on the coal, that they can hear water singing rock. It takes a certain kind of ear to translate vibration into tune. Children have those ears more often than adults. They have not yet taught themselves to hear only what is required. Maggie hummed. That is the fact. Whether she hummed to calm herself, or to match the breath from the crawl space, or because something in the ground asked her to, no archive can say. Pennsylvania is a graveyard of seams and communities. Houses burned because they must, others burned because someone ordered it. Records were struck because they shamed men who owned the ink. Tomorrow's historian often finds nothing weightier than a whisper, and yet sometimes that's enough. Not enough to convict, not enough to vindicate, just enough to put your hand on a table in a warm kitchen and feel a thin vibration you cannot name run into it from the floor. The brain makes a picture. Men with lamps under the floor. Why would you choose any other language? It's already perfect. It is tempting in the telling to give Maggie a grand role, to make her a saint of the shafts or a witch of the seams. It is harder and more honest to admit that she was a child in the wrong house over the wrong breadth of ground in a county that had learned, for reasons made plain by the gallows a few years earlier, to keep its weirdness to itself. Brenner tried to write it down, the county tried to burn it up, the Bible kept a line, the story took root like mycelium under a log. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden, in a rolled township map tucked behind a beam, in a foreman's pocket ledger in an attic trunk in Tyrone, in a marriage record that keeps a maiden name no one thought to cross-check. Perhaps it lies 20 feet under where the Thompson cabin stood, in an old crawl space where the air still moves at odd hours, and in the humming that men pretend they do not hear as they drive past on a new road built with federal money and a bland name. Stand in Clearfield on a cold March night and listen. The rails sing when the freight comes. The creek runs loud under the ice. The wind works the hemlocks until they answer. None of it is uncanny until you pay too much attention. Then everything is uncanny, and some part of you, not in your ears, but a little lower, hums back. Which theory makes the most sense to you? Was Maggie a frightened child breathing bad air, a living echo of the mines whose body turned county noise into a song? Or did she truly show them light, pointing to secrets men above ground weren't meant to see? Which detail disturbed you the most? The crude tunnels to nowhere, the glow on her skin, or the words scrawled in chalk across the hearth? Tell us in the comments. If this story gripped you, please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our investigations into America's darkest historical mysteries. And let us know where you're listening from. We pin your cities and states on our community map. In our next episode, we'll pry open another sealed chapter, pages torn from a doctor's ledger in a southern mill town where, for a season, the dead were recorded twice.